Our second panel is the head of the Palestine mission in London. Thank you very much for coming today, sir. We really appreciate it. I suppose I ought to start by asking a general question, really, which is, because this is an inquiry into what could the British government do more to be of assistance to ensure that there is peace in the Middle East and to have a lasting peace. And I wondered if you could give us your thoughts on what practical measures the UK could take to ensure a ceasefire in Gaza, but also to build a lasting peace.
Thank you very much, Right Honourable Emily Thornberry and members of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee for this very timely event and convening this conversation at such an acute moment. And in answering this question, I would like to speak with the utmost urgency. We, the Palestinian people, are facing an Israeli attempt at total erasure. Physical, political, and legal, not just in Gaza, and not only for the last 14 months, but for more than a century of settler colonialism. This is happening in clear and gross violations of all standards and norms of international law, international humanitarian law, our shared humanity, and simple common decency. And the absence of any effective intervention by the international community over the past 14 months will leave future generations asking, where were we during this genocide? What did we do? The UK could be instrumental in bringing this mass murder, mass destruction to an end. Britain has a unique historical role in and responsibility for Palestine. It remains an important and influential actor on the international scene. It is one of the founders of the global rules-based order. It has deep and lasting connections to large parts of the world, including our region. And it is a uniquely placed Western power, close enough, right in the middle, with relations to the US, very special relations to the US and the EU. With the EU distracted and the US unpredictable as we speak, the UK is one of the few nations in the world in a position to step forward to fill a vacuum of global leadership at a historic moment of epic danger all over the world. So, honourable members, the immediate priority in Palestine remains securing a lasting ceasefire. That's number one, number two, number three priority for us now. An immediate, permanent ceasefire in line with the UN Security Council Resolution 2735, including an exchange of hostages, a full withdrawal of the Israeli army, and a multi-year reconstruction plan for Gaza. This must be overseen by the state of Palestine and our legitimate national institutions. There is no other alternative. The unity of Gaza and the West Bank, including East Jerusalem, the unity of our territory and people, is represented by one legitimate address. That is the Palestinian government. We must immediately ensure the unfettered access of humanitarian aid to 2.3 million people who are suffering an imposed famine, and all of you are getting the images from the north of Gaza. 37 children have died so far of malnutrition. People have been crushed to death as they were trying to get a loaf of bread. And finally, these images are making it to mainstream media like the CNN and the BBC. So images are disheartening. This last October was the highest number of Israel preventing international aid from arriving, even in comparison to last year. And not only the imposed famine, but the wholesale destruction of human and material infrastructure, from housing and healthcare to sewage networks and agricultural land. But a ceasefire will not be lasting, my friends. A ceasefire will not be lasting without the clear political understanding and accompanying investment that the issue of Palestine needs to be resolved now, once and for all. We have got to focus on the root cause. Israel has been clear in word and action that it has no intention of agreeing a ceasefire as of this morning. And I was with our colleagues in Cairo and other places, still foiling several opportunities since November 2023. Israel has been clear over several decades of illegal settlement expansion that it has also no intention of reaching a political outcome other than continued territorial expansion and indefinite military occupation. We have got, Right Honorable Emily, focus on the end game here. And the end game so far is very clear for Israel on the one hand and for us on the other hand. Or as we see now in Gaza, it has turned fully into a genocidal aggression. And therefore, just to touch really on how do we begin to heal this, given what we know already, particularly in light of the International Court of Justice opinion that Israel's occupation is unlawful and must end, that all the settlements are illegal and must be dismantled, and that all third-party states must cease to provide any legal, political, or material support to Israel's occupation. Therefore, in light of this, there are 4 obvious ways to pressure Israel and to change the political status quo, and here I also mean the UK. Number 1, a comprehensive arms embargo. Number 2, sanctions. Number 3, accountability. And number 4, an immediate formal recognition of the state of Palestine.
May I ask you to pause there, because it's a very comprehensive answer, and we have some other questions specifically for you. And we don't want to repeat that, but there may well be many things that you've said in your statement that we would like to ask you further questions on. So, given the time constraints that we have, if you wouldn't mind, I'd like John to ask some further questions, which I think you'd like to
thank
get
you.
some answers to.
Dr. Zomlot, can I begin? Do you unequivocally condemn the attacks carried out by Hamas on October the 7th?
We have been very, very clear from day one that we are not only committed to international law by words, but by deeds. And that's why the state of Palestine has sought the full force of international law. Of course, we reject wholeheartedly, fully, and in absolute terms, the targeting of civilians. That's clear. And we want international institutions to make sure that all war criminals are held accountable. And that's why it was the state of Palestine that actually ratified the Rome Statute and invited the ICC to investigate not certain war crimes, all war crimes, all violations of human rights, all violations of the basic provisions of international law. And as you know, sir, since then, it has been Israel that is blocking us from actually applying the full force of the law.
You'll be aware that there are reports of Palestinian diplomats celebrating what happened on the 7th of October, and that actually is creating part of the problem, that Israel will not have confidence in Palestine's commitment to a two-stage solution unless action is taken to de-radicalize the Palestinian population.
I haven't seen any Palestinian diplomat celebrating anything. Palestinian diplomats are busy trying to expose the ugly reality that we have been living in, not only since the 7th of October, and I've just said in my remarks, this is a war of extermination against the Palestinian people, but even before. On the 6th of October, Right Honorable Friend, it was already reported by international institutions that that was the deadliest year as far as Palestinian children, not in Gaza, but in the West Bank at the hands of the Israeli military forces. So the diplomats are really busy trying to provide protection for our people. And I'd like to remind you also that on the 7th of October, of course, everybody was in a state of shock. But we were not even given a slice of time, as the shortest period of time just to comprehend. All what we got was Netanyahu, Herzog, and all Israeli leaders coming out and say, we are going to be after the Palestinian people. Those are political animals. We will kill all of you. And then Netanyahu quoting the Amalek, that they will kill every child, every woman, every animal. Of course, we went on the defense. And of course, we wanted to make sure that the 7th of October will not be used as a pretext to slaughter our people. And that is exactly what happened.
So, but do you accept that, as all of our witnesses so far have agreed, that a two-state solution is the only way of resolving this, and that will require the Palestinian population to live in peace side by side with the state of Israel?
That question needs to be asked to Netanyahu, really, not to me.
Well, we will, I'm sure, ask it to representatives of Israel, but can I ask you as a representative of the Palestinian Authority?
Yes, at least since 1988, the Palestine Liberation Organization, which is the umbrella organization that represents all Palestinians, the PLO, which is the legitimate entity that represents all, and that's why the UK recognizes the PLO, the US does, and the UN and the rest of the world. In 1988, the PLO declared the state of Palestine on the 1967 borders in line with international consensus and international resolutions. A few years later, the PLO recognized Israel fully as a state, and since then, Israel has been, in my opinion, and in the given the events that has unfolded since then, blocking any possibility of a state. Israel never recognized the state of Palestine. That's why it gets me heated when I hear this question, because it's us who has been working tirelessly to implement international consensus towards a two-state solution. It's us who have recognized the state of Israel. It's Israel and Netanyahu for at least 25 years, since he was elected first prime minister, ingrained in the Likud charter there, and in the coalition agreement, the last Israeli government coalition agreement, that they will never allow for a state of Palestine.
Dan.
Thank you, Chair. Carrying on that point, is it not the case that a two-state solution can only be imposed and pushed for from outside powers? And what would you say that looks like?
It must. It must, because number one, either we have international order or we don't. Either we have law or we don't. You cannot be half committed about legality. And I think legality is very clear. Israel's occupation has got to end. It's almost 6 decades now. The rights of Palestinians towards self-determination has to be implemented, honored.
At the beginning you said the United States was unpredictable.
Yes.
We all expect something to happen when President-elect Trump comes to office.
Yes.
What do you expect from the US? And what other powers, Saudi Arabia, the UK, which outside powers should take a leading role in trying to deliver peace?
I expect one agenda to be advancing, which is the agenda of the rule of law. That's the agenda. There are so many regional and international actors who have different agendas. None of them have the agenda of the rule of law, of the post-World War II rules-based order, to be respected, to be strengthened, to take its responsibility, to apply the law equally on all. That's what I expect the agenda to resolve it. And look at all other conflicts. You will only find when there is such a sustained international intervention, they will resolve. You cannot leave the conflict to be resolved at the whim of this very huge asymmetric power relations between the occupied and the occupier, the colonized and the colonizer, the besieged and the besieger. So yes, we need external interventions. However, that's why I said the UK is very, very crucial at this point in time. You cannot do this in a half-committed way. You cannot be half-committed to legality, to the law. Look at all the policy options that could have helped us achieve a ceasefire, because a ceasefire will not be achieved without enforcing the ceasefire. And the same token, the two-state solution will not be implemented without enforcing the two-state solution. How do you enforce the two-state solution? How do you achieve ceasefire? Number one, you need the arms embargo. And look at the way, take it as an example, the UK did it, the UK government. It was half committed. We will stop some, we will make some exceptions, and the way it was communicated in the political sense. While the decision was sound legally, it was based on legal assessment. The political communication of it preempted any substantial sort of leverage. The same thing applies on the issue of sanctions. While we impose sanctions on the individual settlers, I mean the UK government, and in some settler organizations, still the ecosystem of the settlements is not being really sanctioned and bought. And the ecosystem includes the trade, includes the companies that, including UK companies that profit from these illegalities, including the government, the Israeli government that backs, supports, sponsors directly these illegal colonial settlements. So My answer to you is the only agenda that could resolve this conflict once and for all is an agenda that is multilateral, international, that has international law at the center of their attention, that really wants to apply the law equally, and ends once and for all this culture of impunity, that there is one entity that is above the law and the rule and the exception to every rule. There is why we haven't got to a two-state solution. When everybody, consensus, everybody says it's in the interest of Palestine, the interest of Israel, the interest of the region, the interest of the rest of the world. Why aren't we doing it? It's that half commitment. It's that, look at the U.S. letter that was sent to Israel a month and a half ago. The U.S. letter was very clear by the Secretary of State and the Secretary of Defense to Israel. If you do not allow unfettered humanitarian aid, the U.S. will impose an arms embargo in 1 month. The 1 month came, the 1 month went, and there was no consequences. There is the issue. The issue is when it comes to Israel, the West simply is unable to be fully committed to the very rules, to the very systems, to the very institutions the West has helped establish.
Thank you, Dr. Zomlot.
I have at least 4 people who want to ask you questions, and I'm a little concerned that we may end up with another one of our terribly disruptive votes, possibly more than one vote. So I'm going to need to ask people just to ask one question. I know that there are many more questions people want to ask, but I'm afraid I'm going to have to insist to one question each. Thank you, Emma.
Thank you, Ambassador, for your representations. You talked about a lasting ceasefire, and you mentioned the kind of parameters within it, and the multi-year reconstruction plan, the withdrawal of Israeli forces and the freeing of hostages. I asked a similar question to the previous panel, so I'd love to know your answer to this. Do you think it's possible to reach this long-term settlement of the conflict in stages, starting with a ceasefire, or do you think there should be a simultaneous effort with the ceasefire and future solution negotiations being conducted in parallel?
You know, the Palestine is not the only conflict in the world. There have been many other conflicts, and we don't need to reinvent the wheel here. It's clear. Number one, you never negotiate the principles. You only negotiate the modalities of implementing the principles. So the first and the foremost step that we need right now is that the world establish these principles in legal stones. And it has been happening. The ICJ opinion was clear. The ICC ruling is clear. The UN General Assembly resolutions are clear. The UN Security Council resolution vis-a-vis ceasefire is 3 stages, is clear. The problem is in implementation. It's in enforcement. And here comes the role of the US, the role of the UK, the role of key players that are the pinholders of the international system. So yes, it could be done once we establish such a clear path to everybody, and once we say it by deeds, not by words, that we recognize the 2 states. So the UK must recognize the state of Palestine now, before it's too late, if it's not already too late. Let's not waste more time. And then Palestine is admitted immediately as a full member in the UN. You know what would be the difference? We're done with the principles. It's in stones. There is no longer Israel and the Palestinians. It's Israel and Palestine. And then what we are discussing is minor details with the support of the international community. That is the shift we need to make. Otherwise, if it's just a function of disputed areas and group of people called Palestinians, you saw what Israel has up its sleeves up until this morning. And not only vis-a-vis Palestine, by the way, vis-a-vis the region.
Good, thank you. Emma.
Thank you, Chair. Ambassador, last week in an evidence session with the Alistair Burr, the former Middle East minister, we pushed him on Palestinian recognition and why the UK hadn't recognised Palestine when 3/4 of the General Assembly has. His point was that there was a right time to do that would create some kind of impetus to a peace process. I'm wondering if you support that view.
Support what? I'm sorry, the first one?
He suggested that there was a right time to recognise Palestine that in some way supported the peace process, and I'm wondering if you agree that there is a right time, and if that's now or in the future.
Thank you for the question. I think the right time is now, absolutely now, and we are already late. And the question is not why should the UK recognize the state of Palestine. The question is why the UK did not recognize the state of Palestine until now. That's the only question. And the UK has missed so many opportunities, so many historic opportunities. It missed an opportunity in 2012 when we went to the UN General Assembly for a UN status for the state of Palestine. The majority of the world voted, the UK abstained. It missed an opportunity in 2014 when this House voted overwhelmingly for the recognition of the state of Palestine. It missed an opportunity in 2017, 100 years of the Balfour Declaration, and that was a moment when the UK could come and say, here it is, we take responsibility. And we are about to correct that historic injustice that has befallen the Palestinian people. Instead, the government then doubled down on the wounds of the Palestinian people. And you know the direct role Britain at the time played, that colonial, arrogant moment, promising our land without consulting us and turning us from the native population, the cradle of civilizations, the birthplace of Christianity, into non-Jewish minorities that only have civil and religious rights. By the way, up until now, that's the thinking in Israel. So, of course, Britain needs to do that. A, because recognition is a right, not a gift. And guess who said that, word by word? The current Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer. It's a right, not a gift, not a favor. What are you waiting for then? Number two, it is absolutely the right thing to do to really say that we mean a two-state solution, not only by words, but by action. And number three, it will send the right messages to Israel that, you know what, this is it, we mean it, we are serious. All of your expansion beyond the 67 will not be recognized. It will weaken the forces that will kill the possibility of a two-state solution, and it will empower those who want to see a different future. So it's the most practical, and I'm not going to dwell into it. And I believe every day the UK waits is another day in the coffin of a hope, a real hope for a peaceful resolution, not only for Palestine, but for the entire region. And I think today it's very clear that the serious problem is the relationship between the West, including the UK and Israel. That relationship needs to be unpacked. That relationship needs to be unpacked. Because with all that support, unconditional support, and the lack of real political will to enforce a solution, I think Israel is going to drive itself and maybe the rest of us into a cliff. Recognition would be at least a very serious safety valve that no way, we are not going off a cliff. We will have to take a turn towards a shared future.
I change the subject slightly and go to Matt.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Ambassador. What more can the UK do to encourage those holding British-linked hostages currently in Gaza to be released?
For the full and immediate implementation of the UN Security Council Resolution 2735 that the UK helped draft, sponsored and voted for. That's the key thing, because that resolution has a very clear stages where it begins by the release of and the exchange of hostages, that it outlines the stages of withdrawal, it outlines the roles of national and regional actors, and it has the consensus of the world. We have seen in November that hostages could be released via diplomacy, and given the situation now, and given what happened in Gaza for the last 14 months, I think the safest, best way to do so is to implement the UN Security Council resolution and to see hostages back to their families.
And why are those British-linked hostages not being... Why is the Red Cross not being able to go and see them?
The Red Cross should go and see them and should be able to see them. And
why are they not?
I don't know why they're not. Perhaps, perhaps not only the Red Cross. Gaza has been an arena of mass murder and destruction. This is the first time in history that such a situation is not being covered by international media. Even journalists are not allowed there. Even journalists. And that's why you had Palestinian journalists who have to cover the atrocities themselves, and 134 of them got killed. So not only why the Red Cross is not there, why the UN has been bombed.
Can I ask them, would you take that opportunity
Matt,
to call...
we've still got two more questions and we're going to run out of time. I'm so sorry. This ought to be your last question.
Okay. Well then, would you take that opportunity to call for Hamas to allow the Red Cross in to see those hostages?
absolutely, and also to Israel to allow the Red Cross to access Israeli prisons that have turned into mass murder of Palestinian prisoners and rape that has been very documented. And I have never seen a parliament except the Israeli Knesset debating if raping Palestinian hostages is legitimate or not. So we want to see the Red Cross in Gaza, we want to see the Red Cross in Israeli prisons, and we want to see the ICC implementing their arrest warrant in Israel and everywhere else.
Dr. Sam.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you. Welcome, Ambassador. I want to start by offering condolences because I know that the real situation on the ground. People lose lives, and as I understand it, you've lost some of your family members as well. So, my sincere condolences to you. Just in relation to the settlements and on the West Bank, Ben-Gvir, the minister, has announced an expansion over the coming year, and he has said that he intends to submit further money from the Parliament just on expansions. What do you think this does for the recognition of a state, given that potentially it may no longer be viable?
Thank you very much, Right Honourable. And Ben-Gvir does not just mean expansion. I mean, he means annexation, and that's what they have been doing and working towards. And you may have heard the other fanatical minister in the Israeli government, that is Smotrich, who announced a few weeks ago that Israel will annex the West Bank by the year 2025. That's a few weeks ago. And of course, that's the agenda. That's exactly the agenda. And if you look, the agenda is that of very classic case of settler colonialism, very classic case of ethnic cleansing. And guess who said that this is ethnic cleansing? The former Minister of Defense, Israeli Minister of Defense, Bogi Ayalon, only a couple of weeks ago, that what Israel is doing now in the north of Gaza is a classic case of ethnic cleansing, coupled with the system that you may have documented here in this committee of military occupation, colonization, besiegement, and apartheid, very well documented by the human rights. This is the only future Israel is offered. There is no, and by the way, to limit this only to Netanyahu and the extreme right-wing members of his government does not serve justice to the situation. The majority of the Israeli political class now do not have a Palestinian state as part of the future. It's as simple, as absolute as that. And therefore, the question for us is, how do we challenge this reality? How do we challenge this reality? And the first and the foremost beginning of answering that reality is, how do we change this mindset? Because people are not evil. This is not just about Israelis being evil. It's about the mindset being evil. The mind frame is being evil. And convinced, because of many events happening around them, convinced that the only way forward is by this sheer revenge and reactions and mass murder and mass destruction and no future and no horizon and no peace and no partners, and they don't want to talk to anybody. They just want to use the US provided weapons on mass numbers of civilians. And I believe this is a moment when we need to tap on that shoulder and change that mindset. And you cannot leave it to us, the Palestinians, alone to do it. You cannot.
Ambassador, what can we do in terms of going further? So what actions can we take as a government to prevent settlements expanding and the violent settlers as well, so the increase in violence of settlers in the West Bank? What action do you think this government should be taking?
Exactly what is written in international law. Exactly why we have established the international system. States have responsibilities. And if they do not adhere by these responsibilities, then sanctions are merited. Sanctions are called for and must be implemented. Look at how we ended South Africa apartheid. We are not going to reinvent the wheel. Whenever it comes to Israel, we have to create all the exceptions in the world. Israel is no exception. It has violated every provision of international law, all the way to the genocide in Gaza. It has violated the provision of international law, even though the UN established Israel. Yet, Israel has been in awe with the very provisions of the United Nations. Israel believes that it has the UN Charter. There is a UN Charter for Israel, and there are a UN Charter for the rest of the world. So what we need to do, I go back always, honorable friend, to the very premise of law. Because this isn't just about Israel, this isn't just about Palestine, this is about all of us. Look what is happening in the region now. Look what is happening elsewhere. Either we are serious about the equal application of law or not. So sanctions is important, arms embargo is important, and it's not just an ask, It's an obligation by the UK. It's an obligation by all third states. Once the ICJ in January, already 11 months ago, came out and said that the crime of genocide brought by South Africa against Israel is plausible, that genocide is plausible, the conversation should have been over, and we are looking at a former Attorney General here. The conversation should be over. Then the full force of the law must be applied. So how do you apply it? Why do you apply the law? You apply the law also, not only justice for the victims, but deterrence. You want to deter that mindset. And therefore sanctions, arms embargo, accountability. People are being so resilient of the idea that Israeli leaders should be held accountable. We hear Western leaders, politicians, saying that the ICC was not established for countries like the US or Britain or Israel. Seriously? So the ICC was established for the brown and the black and the yellow, not the white? This is a joke. This is the beginning of the end of the international system we built. That's why people of the South, people of the East, people everywhere are losing faith in that international system. That's why that system is under the biggest stress test you can imagine. So the answer to your question, honorable friend, is just apply the law. Put Israel under the law, not above it. And deal with this West-Israel relationship. Every morning, Emily, I hear a Western politician, a British politician, comes out and says Israel is our closest ally. I don't understand that. What about Europe? What about others? There is no daylight between us and Israel. How come? Israel is a state. The UK is a state. In some areas, when you voice concerns, criticisms against Israeli policy that includes a genocide, you are seen to be anti-British. And then they come out and they say, we have shared values with Israel, British politicians. Can you please, somebody tell me, what are these shared values? The shared values of what? Of supremacy? Of wholesale denial of people's rights? Of ethnic cleansing? Of depopulating entire areas? 14,000 children have been slain over the last 14 months. 14,000. Do I need to list for you how many aid workers? The highest in the history of conflicts. The highest number of journalists. The highest number of doctors. Did you hear Dr. Husam Abu Safiyyah in the north of Gaza only last week? He had to bury his 15-year-old son that was killed in that hospital. His hospital and himself was severely injured, is being fought hard because Israel is not only targeting lives, it's targeting livelihoods. They want to see no hospital, no school, no water, no nothing. And yet you hear Western politicians every single morning about shared values. Come out and tell us, come out of the closet and tell us, what are these shared values? That relationship needs to be visited, looked at, and then Israel needs to put exactly where it should be. If Israel wants to be a member of the UN, and you saw the Israeli ambassador to the UN shredding the UN Charter, literally shredding the UN Charter. If Israel wants to be part of the UN, part of the community of nations, part of the region, it cannot exist because it bombs the region. It has bombed Lebanon, it is bombing Syria, it's bombing everywhere. It exists because the region accepts it. And the region has offered Israel a formula of acceptance. That formula is very clear. Resolve the Palestinian issue, end your occupation, and we will normalize you and the relationship not only with 22 Arab countries, but with 75 countries. Do you know how old that model is, formula? More than 25 years. Since 2002, 23 years. And it was completely disregarded. Because Israel wants to bypass the Palestinian issue. Israel wants to be normalized without resolving the Palestinian issue. Why am I going so long with this? Because I think the problem is not just Israel. Because, Israel is like any other state. If you can have the cake and eat it too, why not? So Israel needs to receive consequences, and not just Israel. Anybody who violates the very provisions of the system we built needs to be brought to accountability. So the answer is again and again in the rule of law.
I want to bring Blair in, and if we're able to get through Blair's questions, I'm going to let Uma ask another question because I know that she wanted to ask another one. But we're still dependent on the bells of the votes.
Thank you, Ambassador. Can I also acknowledge and offer my condolences for your family's suffering over the last 14 months.
In your mission statement, you call for a just and equitable solution to the issue of Palestinian refugees. Could you expand on what that means in practice, and whether there is room for negotiation and alternative arrangements within that desire for the return of refugees?
Can I ask you, Barin, why, Right Honourable, why do you think that statement is problematic, a just resolution to the issue of refugees?
I don't think it's problematic. I'm asking you to outline what it means in practice.
It means what it means. It means that 2/3 of the Palestinian people were ethnically cleansed from their homes and farms and livelihoods in 1948. Those became the biggest refugee issue in the region and in the globe. That's why the UN had established international law vis-à-vis how to resolve the issues, including Resolution 194, and that's why the UN also established UNRWA to service these refugees until their issue is resolved. And that's exactly why Netanyahu is targeting UNRWA, because he's linking UNRWA to the right of return, and he's wrong there. UNRWA is just to provide services to the refugees, but the right of return is enshrined in their property rights. I mean, there is the collective and there is the individual. Those people, including my own father and grandfather, they have deeds to their own homes. So we cannot brush this issue under the carpet. And this is not an issue just up for negotiation and compromise. I think we have to make a distinction between the principle and the sort of resolutions. And the principle has got to be accepted. Israel has to take its responsibility, acknowledge its wrongdoing in 1948, the Nakba. Peace will not be done or achieved or enjoyed if it's not based on justice. And this is not a statement. Go everywhere without achieving justice. Peace is not sustainable. We have tried it many times. And how can you tell 2/3 of the Palestinian people, oops, we have negotiated your rights away? But there are models. There are international models. Look at the Balkans. There are options that are given to these people. And if I want to offer Israel a deal, it has to be a final deal where everybody is satisfied and the future is going to be shared. But this business of haggling, this business of haggling, can you please forego the right of return before we begin to speak? Can you just compromise this? Can you compromise further that? Let me say this, Baron, allow me. Peace means the three following things for us. And whatever happens, these three rights have to be achieved. Number one,
may I just... It would be very good. I very much like to hear the three points, but I think I'll then need to draw your evidence to a close. I'm so sorry. I don't mean to interrupt you. I'm just saying you're about to say that the peace will depend on three things, and if you would be kind enough to tell us those, but then I'd need to bring your evidence to an end.
First, the right to self-determination. We are a nation, peoplehood on our land, and we have functioning government. We have got to have a state that can protect us, and look what happened to us over the years, and can represent us internationally and provide for us a political democratic system. Number two, the right of return and the right of refugees to be resolved, and I believe there are already formulas that would be satisfactory. And number three is being treated equally wherever we are. However, the business of let's push the Palestinians a bit more is not going to do. The minimum we could accept, the maximum we could offer is what have been on the offer for the last 35 years. A state of Palestine on the 1967 borders with East Jerusalem as its capital, resolving the issue of refugees and treating Palestinians with dignity and equality everywhere. And I believe these are not asks, these are obligations upon any party that deals with us.
Thank you. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you for coming today, and thank you for giving us your time. Thank you.